A fugitive walked into a police station and handed the sheriff something that made him go pale. In a small, quiet American town, where the biggest daily excitement was the sound of the noon freight train rattling past the old grain mill, there came a day so strange and so unnervingly cinematic that every deputy, every dispatcher, and every resident who heard about it afterward would remember exactly where they were when the story broke. Because on that day, a man who had been hunted for 3 years straight, a man whose mugshot was pinned on half the bulletin boards across the state, walked straight through the front doors of the county sheriff's office, signed his name on the visitor clipboard with a shaking hand, and announced, in a calm, almost relieved voice, "I'm here to turn myself in, but only if you give this directly to the sheriff." And the moment he placed the folded object on the counter, an object wrapped in evidence tape that didn't belong to any law enforcement agency in the region, the deputy behind the desk froze, swallowed hard, and called for Sheriff Dalton Hayes to come up front immediately. Sheriff Hayes, late 50s, tired eyes, a man who'd seen everything from meth labs in cornfields to shootouts on dirt roads, walked in, expecting the usual. Someone reporting a stolen bike, a dispute with a neighbor, maybe a drunk asking for a ride home. But instead he found Ethan Cole, the fugitive whose name he'd been hearing for years, the man suspected in the disappearance of a young schoolteacher named Lauren Avery, sitting quietly on the lobby chair, like he'd been waiting for a haircut appointment. And for a long, heavy moment, nobody spoke, until Ethan slowly lifted his hand, pointed at the taped object on the counter, and said, "Sheriff, everything you think you know about my case is wrong." And the sheriff, trying not to show the sudden spike of adrenaline pounding behind his ribs, walked forward, picked up the item, and realized instantly, by its weight, by its rigid shape, by the tiny smear on the tape, that he was holding something that had no earthly reason to be in the possession of a fugitive, a police-issue body camera, scorched on one side and still stained with dried blood. And now, that's where the whole thing flips, because this story doesn't start with Ethan walking into the station. No, it starts 3 years earlier, when Lauren Avery, 27 years old, universally adored, a woman who taught 4th grade and spent weekends volunteering at animal rescues, vanished one October night after closing her classroom, and the only clue investigators found was her car, abandoned on a logging road, with the driver's side door open, her purse inside, and a muddy boot print on the seat that led detectives straight to Ethan Cole, a private contractor who'd been hired to repair the school's HVAC system the very week Lauren disappeared. And within days, his face was circulating statewide with a warrant for questioning. But when deputies arrived at his house for a routine conversation, Ethan was already gone, leaving nothing but a half-packed suitcase, a smashed cell phone, and a hidden drawer containing Lauren's missing necklace. And from that moment on, he wasn't just a person of interest. He was the prime suspect in the presumed abduction and murder of a beloved teacher, and the whole town agreed Ethan had done it. And here's where the problem begins. The hunt dragged on for years, burning through manpower, overtime, and countless dead-end sightings, while the Avery family lived in a purgatory of grief, with no body, no confession, no closure. And every time Sheriff Hayes checked the case file, he saw Lauren smile, looking back at him from her school portrait photo, and felt the crushing weight of failure, until the morning Ethan stepped into the station, holding a piece of evidence that wasn't even supposed to exist. Because according to all official reports from that week, no officer, deputy, or detective had been issued a body cam during Lauren's disappearance. They didn't switch to full-time body-worn cameras until months later, due to budget delays. So the sheriff, frowning in confusion, walked Ethan into the interrogation room, ordered the deputies to seal the lobby, and then, with the recorder on, and a tension so thick it felt physical, said, "Explain, now." What Ethan said next would unwind the entire case, like a thread pulled from a sweater. Ethan claimed that he hadn't kidnapped Lauren, and hadn't even spoken to her outside of casual greetings in the hallway. Instead, he swore he'd witnessed something the night she vanished. Something he wasn't meant to see. Something involving a deputy named Mark Leland, a man who had resigned abruptly 2 months after Lauren's disappearance and moved out of state before anyone asked questions, a man Sheriff Hayes once considered a friend. According to Ethan, on the night of Lauren's disappearance, he had stayed late at the school, finishing ductwork above the hallway ceiling, when he overheard Lauren arguing with someone near the back exit, and when he peeked through the vent, he saw Deputy Leland gripping Lauren's arm, whispering something that made her recoil, and before Ethan could crawl away and pretend he'd seen nothing, the deputy looked up and spotted him, and immediately Ethan heard footsteps coming his way, forcing him to drop down into a storage room and sprint out the side exit. Ethan insisted that he tried calling 911 that night from his old flip phone, but realized too late the call never connected due to lack of signal, and by the time he made it home, someone had broken into his house and planted Lauren's necklace. He believed Leland had done it to frame him and erase the only witness. Sheriff Hayes, skeptical but disturbed, demanded proof, and that's when Ethan slid the body camera across the table and said, "This belonged to Leland. He wore it secretly. It caught everything. That night, and others." The sheriff stared at the blood-stained device, feeling cold all over, because if what Ethan was saying was true, that meant a deputy had abducted a teacher on his watch, used his badge to get close to her, and then framed an innocent man, and worst of all, the sheriff had unknowingly helped hunt Ethan for years, while the real criminal lived freely. With trembling hands, the sheriff called in his tech specialist, ordered them to retrieve the footage, and the room filled with oppressive silence as everyone waited for the screen to light up. And when it did, the first clip showed Deputy Leland approaching Lauren's classroom late at night, blocking her path, speaking in a tone that suggested familiarity, too much familiarity, while Lauren's body language showed fear, not comfort. And then the footage jumped, glitching, before revealing Lauren's car parked on the logging road, with Leland standing by the open door, motioning for her to stay calm, as if trying to convince her not to run. And then, horrifyingly, the camera caught a struggle, Lauren breaking free, Leland grabbing her, silencing her, dragging her toward the trees. The room went silent, except for Ethan quietly exhaling, like all the guilt he'd carried for 3 agonizing years was draining out of him. But then came the blood-stained part. One final corrupted clip showed Leland stumbling back to his patrol car hours later, bleeding heavily from his arm, cursing into the darkness, whispering repeatedly, "She scratched me. She scratched me. She scratched me." And as he leaned into the driver's seat, the camera caught a reflection of his face, the face of a man no longer in control, but spiraling, dangerous, frantic. Sheriff Hayes felt something inside him snap. Not anger, not sadness, but a cold, focused resolve, because now he knew exactly what had to be done. He immediately contacted state investigators, issued a warrant for Leland, and within 48 hours, the former deputy was tracked down at a cabin 2 states away, living under an alias, hiding in plain sight. The arrest was quick but tense. Leland tried to run, got tackled, and when confronted with the footage, he broke, not with tears but with rage, shouting that Lauren should have kept quiet, that Ethan should have stayed in the ceiling, and that none of this was supposed to come back. His trial became one of the most widely followed cases in the region, and the courtroom gasped when experts revealed that the scratches seen in the footage contained Lauren's DNA under Leland's skin, preserved after all those years, and when prosecutors played the recovered clips, even the judge struggled to maintain composure. Ethan, meanwhile, was officially cleared of all charges, and for the first time in years stood outside, without handcuffs, breathing free air, though the toll of his fugitive life showed in every exhausted line on his face. Lauren's remains were found buried behind Leland's old hunting cabin, giving her family the closure they'd begged for since day one, and justice, real justice, was finally served. The town mourned, healed, and slowly tried to move forward, and Sheriff Hayes, forever changed, updated his department policies, vowing never to let blind trust outweigh vigilance again. But here's the twist, the part that reframes everything and still keeps investigators awake today. During evidence cataloging, analysts discovered that the body camera Ethan turned in wasn't Leland's only one. It was number 3 of a set of 4, and cameras 1, 2, and 4 are still missing, still unaccounted for, still out there somewhere, and according to the serial number. Records. Those missing devices were activated on nights tied to 3 other unsolved disappearances in the region, cases previously believed unrelated. And the last frame of the footage, the very last millisecond before the camera corrupted completely, showed something eerie behind Leland's shoulder. Someone else's shadow moving in the trees, as if another person had been standing there the entire time. Investigators don't know who that second figure was. Leland refuses to speak about it, and Ethan, when asked if he'd ever seen anyone else that night, simply shook his head and said, "All I know is someone else climbed into my house after he left, someone lighter on their feet." So the case that ended one nightmare just might have opened the door to something far bigger, darker, and still lurking just beyond the tree line. If you want more twisted true crime stories like this one, stories where every clue looks one way until the very last second flips it upside down, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next story.